it later with graphics and whatnot. Hey, welcome back to the Give a Damn podcast. We're virtually joined by Alan Stein Jr., a very busy and professional speaker, all sorts of cool stuff we get to talk about. But without me rambling too much, Alan, thanks, man. Thanks for joining us. It's an honor to have you.
My pleasure. I'm excited for a fun conversation, and I'll go on record as saying I do give a damn.
I love it. Well, yes, you do. It's been very evident in the short time I've been following your journey on LinkedIn and catching up with your speaking content, your writing content. The way that you tell stories is captivating, and so we're going to cover a lot of ground. I don't know the best way to get out of my brain. I want to ask you about your Jordan collection. I want to ask about your speaking profession. I want to ask about your impact you're making with leaders. I want to ask about your selfie you took with KD when you're training him. There's so many, but I think the very first question we'll start with is who's Miss Laszlo?
Well, yeah, and if you wanted, you could have just put all those on a big wheel and spin the wheel and hit any one of those, because I'm happy to share and talk about any one of those prompts.
I love it.
So, for a little bit of context, both of my parents were elementary educators. My mom was a first grade teacher for 30 years, and my father started as a teacher and then progressed to administration and ended up as a middle school principal. So I'd always had a really strong respect and appreciation for education and for teachers, especially as servant leaders. And one thing I unconsciously picked up when I was younger was how much my parents loved what it was that they did for a living. You know, they took a tremendous amount of pride in pouring into young people. And when I graduated from high school in the late 90s or mid 90s and went to college, I didn't quite have clear direction on what I wanted to do. And I figured if that was a vocation that filled my parents' buckets, maybe it'd be one that would fill mine as well. So not having any real clear direction, I decided to be an elementary ed major. And kind of in the back of my mind, though, was I really wanted to be a basketball coach. But that really wasn't a full-time vocation for someone unless you were in college or the NBA. So I figured, I could be a teacher by day and a basketball coach by night. And as I kind of started diving into the elementary ed curriculum, I started to realize that I didn't enjoy the teaching aspect near as much as I enjoyed the basketball component. And Miss Laszlo was the teacher that I did my initial student teaching with as part of that curriculum. And I remember working with their students. And one day she encouraged the students to go outside and start collecting leaves. The leaves had just changed and they were dropping off the trees. And she wanted the students to go collect the leaves, laminate the leaves, study and look up what type of leaves they were. And I remember in that moment, we all have these kind of light bulb moments. I remember thinking, I don't care about leaves. Respectfully, I don't see any importance in knowing anything about leaves. And in that moment, I knew that there's no way that I could spend the next, say, 30 years of my life trying to convince kids to care about something that I didn't care about. And I say that with a wink and a smile because, now that I'm older, hopefully with a little more wisdom and maturity, I understand now that assignments like that aren't just about leads. It's about the process. It's about learning to gather information. It's about being open to exposing yourself to different things. So, I was pretty short-sighted at the time, but thankfully, me having no interest in leaves prompted me to go meet with my advisor, change my major, and put me on a completely different path. And, I say all of that with a huge smile and wink because I still have nothing but love and reverence for teachers and people that pour into young people. And I understand there's most likely parts of every curriculum that teachers don't get super excited about. But yeah, that experience with Miss Laszlo actually put me on the path to land me where I am today. So as much as I don't care about leaves, I'm very grateful that I had that experience.
100%. I'm grateful to hear that out of your mouth because as I read it on your website, it was just this I experienced your copy and your About Us section of your site as Miss Laszlo. In the moment, you didn't love that experiment or that project or that assignment or the duties that may be required for the next 30 years, as you said, but it was something you came back to. And it
Yeah.
Miss Laszlo and Kobe were both referenced in that same story. How do those two people connect?
Well, ultimately, it's about the process. It's about focusing on the basics. It's about digging a layer deeper than maybe what's right in front of you. Like I said, really only a small part of that assignment is about leaves. It's more about the process of learning how to learn, learning how to research, learning how to take in information, and those skills are invaluable. And one of the things I find fascinating now, I'm almost 50 years old, and I'm the proud father of 3 children. I have 14-year-old twin sons who are in 9th grade and a 12-year-old daughter in 7th grade. And of course, inevitably, the topic comes up often, like, Dad, why are we doing this in school? I'm never going to need to use this in the
That's
real
right. Yep.
world. I always believe in being incredibly honest with my own children. And I'll readily acknowledge, yeah, there's a good chance you will never use that in the real world. In fact, most of my kids' current homework assignments are things I can't even do because they
100%.
know how to
Yes.
do them.
Yes.
But that's the lesson I share with them is, yeah, I understand that you may never have to do this, and there's nothing wrong with you not wanting to do this assignment, but understand the bigger picture is learning how to learn, learning about systems and processes, learning how to take in and use information, learning how to be a critical thinker, learning how to be a problem solver. And these are all just ways to practice those skill sets. And you will absolutely use those skill sets in the real world. And then I take it one step further and remind them that often there are things in life that are required of us that we don't necessarily want to do in the moment, but they might be the conduit to something that is really important to us. And for my 3 children, all of whom are athletes, they play basketball. I let them know, hey, you don't have to love your academic work, but if you don't do your academic work, you won't be able to play basketball. So if basketball is something that means a lot to you, then you need to be able to invest into your academic work because that is a prerequisite to the thing you love. So you might not want to do this assignment. You might not think it has, any applicability to your life, and that might be true. But if you want to play basketball, then you need to do this assignment. And we've had, some real meaningful and heart connected conversations over those type of topics.
100%. No, that's well said. It reminds me, we have a client here in Kansas City we met with this morning, and his son is a graduate assistant in the football program at Ole Miss. And it's a bit like, for a 20-year-old kid or whatever it is, young man, that's a big job. Like, he's every bit as committed as the head coach Lane Kiffin, all the way down to literally his role. And so the dad is the client, but he was recounting a story about his wife, the mom, and she's a high powered real estate agent, and they've got access to resources and all sorts of cool stuff, right? But mom said, hey, I don't care how cool it is being involved on the sideline at Ole Miss. If you don't get your studies right, bro, like, you're coming home. And it's the same thing, like, at every level, whether that's middle school, high school, college, working professionals, like and I think the shift I want to make, because it's all over your website and your projects, is like these fundamentals, these simple successes. Like, sometimes we make stuff so complicated and crazy in order to maybe feel safe, feel smart, feel important, feel whatever. And in your story on the website about you training with Kobe Bryant at 3:30 in the morning and looking over, if I get the details right or wrong, tell me. But you're like, yo, Kobe, why are you still just doing these basic fundamentals? And he's like, because I'm Kobe Bryant. That's what I do. I'm like dying to hear that story firsthand.
Yeah, well, before I tell that, one other thought that comes to mind kind of on this theme that we were just talking about is, when you're younger, I think it's important to do the things that you have to do so that when you get a little bit older, you can do the things that you want to do. I've designed my life with great specificity, and I have an amazing life right now. And that's because at present, most of the things I do are things I want to do in places I want to be with people I want to work with. And I'm so grateful for that. But again, footnote, I'm almost 50 years old. I
Yes.
didn't have those liberties when I was 18 or 25 or even in my 30s. I
100%.
still had to spend time doing lots of things that I didn't necessarily want to do to build certain skill sets and provide opportunities that now afford me the freedom to spend most of my time doing what I want to do. So keep in mind too that it's a process in order to get there. Now, to come
100%.
back to what you were just talking about, so the one slight change in the detail of what you just said was I wasn't actually training Kobe that morning. I was just an observer. He had his trainer there, and he was working out really early in the morning, and I was just allowed to come watch, and I was just a bystander. And I do remember being really surprised at the basic fundamentals that he was working on. I mean, they were drills and exercises that I had done with middle school age players. Now, of course, this was Kobe Bryant, so he was, he was dialed in at an unparalleled level of intensity. He had surgical
Mama mentality, baby. Yeah, that's right.
but he was really focused on the basics. And when I did later that day at camp asked him why a player at his level would be focused on the basics, he said something that changed my life forever. He said, the reason I'm the best player in the world is because I never get bored with the basics. And still to this day, I have told that story thousands of times over the last 2 decades, and it still makes the hairs on my neck stand up because it was that impactful. And that ever since has really kind of been my foundational mantra of the operating system of my life, which is focusing on the fundamentals and learning how to simplify success, to untether from the unnecessarily complex. See, I'm a big believer that complexity undermines execution. That in order for us to execute and implement and take action, we need to make things as simplified as possible. But one real important distinction for anyone listening or watching is just because something is basic, it doesn't mean it's easy. Those aren't synonyms, but people mistakenly use those words as if they're interchangeable. I mean, what it takes to be elite in almost any area of life is very basic in premise. But as anyone will tell you, it is certainly not easy to do those things. So it's important for folks to understand the difference between basic and easy. We should be doing everything in our power to make things as basic, as fundamental, and as simplified as possible. And then we should give the best effort that we're capable of as consistently as possible in order to execute and make those things happen.
It's beautiful, man. It's so good. And it brings to mind for me, it is, generally speaking, we aren't lacking education or knowledge, but it is so hard sometimes, at least for me, at least for my squirrel brained instincts, to like literally just focus on the fundamentals. I love how you said like the boring basics, like the ability to walk and eat right and take care of your relationships and take care of your health and take care of your mental health. It's like we don't need to be told that, and yet we are so, and maybe we can kind of move into the Chase Jarvis stuff, but we are so programmed to distraction. We're so programmed to split attention. We're so programmed to numbed existence through social media or whatever. Like the fundamentals are most of the time kind of hiding in plain sight, right in front of us, or frankly maybe even right in us, and yet we struggle to execute those. Why is that?
Well, in full transparency, I mean, I'll readily acknowledge that in most areas, especially when you've been working on something for a while or working on your craft, that the fundamentals can become mundane. They can become monotonous. I mean, I would never argue that, working on the basics for 20 straight years is still exhilarating, but there's a few thoughts. One, very similar to what we were talking about with Miss Laszlo, that it wasn't about the leaves. It was about the greater picture of the process of learning how to learn. Well, it's the same thing with this. If you're working on the fundamentals, it's not necessarily about the fundamentals that are in front of you. It's about what mastery of those skill sets will allow you to do. And usually what you're aiming for, what it will allow you to do, that still will excite you and fill you up. When I used to work with basketball players and they would get bored working on the fundamentals, I'd say, is winning boring? Is scoring boring? No, of course not. Well, mastery of shooting, passing, rebounding, defending, and handling the ball is what's going to allow you to win at a high level. And there's nothing boring about winning. So it's also looking at the fundamentals as a means to an end and not as an end itself. And I also want to say that I'm not asserting that people only do the basics. I'm recommending that they never leave them. Yes, you absolutely at different times will level up and matriculate up to more advanced techniques and more advanced drills and more advanced concepts. But what you never do is you never leave the basics. So an example of that, recently retired Hall of Fame coach Nick Saban. If you ever went to an Alabama football practice, you're talking about the best collegiate players in the world, one of the best team sport programs of all time. And at some point during that practice, those all-American athletes will be doing basic blocking and tackling, basic throwing and catching drills. Now, they'll also do some more advanced stuff, but that fundamental component is a puzzle piece that's in every single practice. And I could say the same for any of the sports dynasties that we've seen, whether it's Greg Popovich and the San Antonio Spurs, or the Patriots or Duke basketball, any of those programs, especially in their heyday, were still built on the fundamentals. But yeah, you can still work on more advanced offensive moves and more advanced sets and plays, but you never leave the basics. When you leave the basics, it's like pulling the rug out from underneath everything else you'd built.
Yeah, so good. My our oldest daughter and I are watching the starting five on Netflix, and it's like LeBron, Anthony Edwards, Jason Tatum. I'm gonna forget. There's five guys that they're like following around.
Yep.
And we're only a couple episodes in, and we went and saw her in Phoenix last week at college, and we kind of just binged a couple of the shows late one night. And I was so surprised. I shouldn't have been, because you've literally done this for a living. But I was so surprised, and I'm just going to pick one of the guys about LeBron. He's 38 or 39 or whatever, and he spends literally hours every day doing the most basic stuff, like stretching, like taking a nap, like eating the right food, and he's out there. I love the scene because he's pissed that he was on like the minutes restriction at the beginning of the year last year. And he's like, I'm the most in shape dude in the league, and he's 38. And it of course, like the analogy breaks down at some point for like normal people who aren't built like him. But I think the beauty of this, the reminder was so obvious. The reminder to me was like, oh my goodness, he just does this boring ass shit, pardon the language, every single day. And he's done that for 21 years. And there's a reason he's arguably, I mean, I know you're a Jordan guy, I'm a Jordan guy. He's the second best basketball player of all time.
Yeah, he's absolutely remarkable. And two things kind of underpin the ability to do that, and that is discipline and consistency. It takes immense discipline to block out all of the white noise, untether from the unnecessarily complex, and focus on the fundamentals relentlessly during the unseen hours. But then it's also something that you can't do every once in a while, or do when you feel like it, or do when the mood strikes, or do when it's convenient. Those have to be things that you do every single day. And that's what makes LeBron so remarkable. I mean, it's not even worth having the conversation whether he's the best of all time, because it's irrelevant. I mean, this dude for 2 straight decades has been unbelievably disciplined and consistent and committed to his body, to his craft, to his team. And we should be in awe of that. And, one of the reasons that I don't think the fundamentals get the attention they should, quite honestly, is because they're hard to sell. They're hard to make money off of. They're hard to profit. And most of the noise that we all consume,
100%,
especially on social media, is somebody trying to sell something. You're hard pressed to sell a fitness routine to someone that says you need to do push-ups and pull-ups and dips and planks and lunges. They want to see some sizzle with the steak. They want to see something sexy. They don't want to see a nutrition regimen that says you need to eat eggs and oatmeal and sweet potato and chicken. They want to see something flashy.
100%.
If you think about any area of life, if you break it down to the basics, like I always remind basketball teams, like let's look at basketball, the game of basketball at its most fundamental level. If you want your team to be successful, which in basketball is defined as having more points on the scoreboard than the other team when the final buzzer goes off, if you want to increase the likelihood of that happening, then on offense, you need to take the highest percentage shot possible. And on defense, you need to make the opponent take the lowest percentage shot possible. If you do those two things consistently, you'll win almost every game you play. Now, obviously, there's a tremendous amount of nuance on how you take the highest percentage shot possible, and an equal amount of nuance on how you force your opponent to take a lower percentage shot. That's the basic of the game. Think about, if you want to be in good physical shape, well, you need to move your body, you need to progressively overload it, you need to eat well, and you need to get sleep. Like, we don't need to make it any more complicated than that.
100%.
There's some nuance into what you need to do when you move your body, and some nuance into what is healthy eating. But generally speaking, that's what you need to do. If you want to have a successful business, whether you sell a product or a service, you need to offer more in value than you ask for in payment, and you need to provide an unbelievable customer experience.
Amen. Preach.
Full stop. You just have to do those two things. Now, again, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, there's some nuance to each of those. If you want to have a thriving relationship, whether it's an intimate relationship or a friendship, you need to learn how to speak the other person's language. You have to get good at actively listening. You have to be empathetic and compassionate. You have to give a damn. Like, if you do those things, you will have a thriving relationship. And if you start to see your relationship tank, or your business is not doing well, or your body's starting to fall apart, I can almost promise you it's because you stopped doing those basic things.
Man, come on. I'd come to your TED Talk on that all day. It's so good and right and true. And I've used this terrible analogy at times with in business conversations with either our team or clients or whatever. And it's like the person you see on like an Instagram reel or a TikTok video that's like talking about how unhealthy fruit is, for example. And like, you eat too much fruit, you're going to like have too much sugar. Well, no judgment. And then like on the probably in their real life, they're like pounding Dr. Peppers. It's like, why are we arguing about? It's just such a weird thing that I think as drifting humanity, we want this, like you said, these shiny, sexy answers to something that's feels complicated, but it's actually in reality like, whoa, if we, and so I want to shift into, I wonder what those simple business, practical leadership, when you distill business down, it's like, is there a team that cares about this product and service that is united and connected? And is there a, like, I love how you said it, is there a growing client base that receives more value than the price they pay? It's like really not that difficult.
No,
and of course there's nuance, but what are those those basic fundamentals?
But before we get to those, one other thought comes to mind. And one of the things I love to do is I love to talk and teach and preach in general principles that apply to multiple areas of our life. Like these concepts, and I didn't invent any of these concepts. They've been around a lot longer than I've been around, and they'll be around a lot longer than I'll be around. But they have such high utility that they apply to every area of our life. I mean, just within this conversation, I mean, we've been talking about basketball, we've been talking about business, we've been talking about our bodies, we've been talking about relationships. The same principles hold true. And I'm a big believer that anytime you're not getting the result or the output in any of those areas, the very first thing you need to do is ask yourself, how have I been complicit in not getting what I want? Like, what is my role in not getting what I want? We lost the basketball game. We didn't make the sale, or we didn't hit our numbers. My relationship isn't going well. I don't like the way I look and feel. The very first thing needs to be is, how have I contributed to not getting what I want? And that's an attitude, hat tip to Jocko Willink, of extreme ownership. It's a saying that I'm going to look at myself first. You know, what most people tend to do when they don't get the results that they want is they blame, they complain, and they make excuses. It's someone else's fault for why their body doesn't look the way they want, or why their relationship isn't going well, or why their business is tanking. And I think the very first thing we need to do is ask how we've been complicit. And I think when we do that with some honesty and some vulnerability and a little bit of courage, we usually uncover, at least in my own life experience, we usually uncover that we've drifted away from the fundamentals. We've stopped doing the basic building blocks in those different areas. And when we recommit to those, then we'll start to see our performance, and thus our results and outcomes start to increase.
I love that. It's so good. I first encountered in your orbit, I got flooded into your lovely orbit On a random Saturday night, my mother-in-law texted me and she was like, we just wrapped up the creative planning conference in Kansas City. It's something they look forward to every year. And she was like, you got to check out and follow this guy, Alan Stein Jr. His story's amazing. He brought tons of energy and insights to this room. And I wonder what it was like for you on that stage in Kansas City. What is like purpose, like in the guts and heart of you, that you like beg and plead and desire for people to take away from encounters in your speaking business?
Well, first and foremost, I'm indebted to your mother-in-law. That was very kind of her. I'm glad that my talk resonated. You know what most people don't know. I was sick as a dog when I gave that keynote.
Oh no.
The week before, I had the flu. I had a nasty cough. I just wasn't feeling well. But thankfully, I was able to kind of compartmentalize that and still get on stage and have a requisite amount of energy. And that's because I take a lot of pride in being a professional. And being a professional means you show up to do the job you were paid to do to the best of your ability, regardless of how you feel. Like, you know, people would have been empathetic and understanding if they knew that I had been sick the week prior, but I'm not going to shortchange them. Like, I believe that our time and our attention are our most precious resources. And for the people that, you know, made the investment monetarily and with their time and attention to be in that room, I feel indebted to deliver for them. So I can put aside the fact that I wasn't feeling great physically for a little bit to make sure I had everything in my arsenal to over deliver. So I'm just grateful that it resonated and she connected us, or we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
100%, 100%. As you've done your work, man, I still have so many questions, and I maybe we'll just have to do this again at another point.
Yeah, we
But
can do that for sure.
when you think of the changing, a friend of mine named Brad Hill, he uses this phrase that I love. He calls it the changing landscape of leadership. So as you sit with corporate leaders, and one of your LinkedIn posts that comes to mind is, I think, and tell me if the details are wrong, you spoke to the like Freddy's franchise team in Phoenix or Scottsdale or something last week. And it resonated because we were literally in the same city at the same time. But why, like, what is it about leadership these days that and I'm connecting another real quick thought, the Nick Saban comment earlier. He was on ESPN Game Day a couple weeks ago, and he talked about transformational leadership versus transactional leadership. So how does your work and think about Success Simplified help leaders who are trying to figure out the most effective way to lead teams, lead families, lead themselves? It's a confusing world, and I think it's hard to figure out sometimes where to place that time and attention. So there's like 7 questions in one, which I'm great at doing.
No,
But
I think I can grab that and
okay,
take that in a fun
okay,
direction. And
sweet.
before I answer it, let me just say that, in full disclaimer, every single thing I share on stage and every single thing I share on page, I'm not coming from a place of mastery. These are all things that I am still continuing to work on. Now, what I can say with a huge smile is, in the vast majority of these areas, I'm moving in the right direction and I've made some great progress. And for that, I'm proud. And many of the things I share on stage, I learned the hard way because I used to do
100%.
them the opposite way. You know, I preach now, as I just did to you, about the dangers of blaming, complaining, and making excuses. Well, if you would have known me 15 to 20 years ago, I was the king of blaming, complaining, and making excuses. I was the king of saying why it was someone else's fault or why things didn't go my way. And I realized that never helped me move forward. And that always left me feeling incredibly empty. So I've changed my ways. And one of the things that you just brought up, and I'm so glad you did, is the difference between transactional and transformational leadership. And I can say with a huge smile again that previously I was much more of a transactional leader. And a transactional leader is concerned with what they get. A transformational leader is focused on what they give. See, a transformational leader shifts their focus off of what they want from people, and they shift it to what they want for people. So an example is a CEO of a 100-person company. A transactional leader says, I have 99 people that work for me. A transformational leader says, I work for 99 people. It is my job to show up and pour into them and empower them and challenge them and motivate them and inspire them and hold them accountable to do their best work so that we can all get where we're trying to go. And it's that shift of focus off of focused on me to focused on others. That's the big distinction between transactional and transformational. And I'll say that when I made that shift, really it took me 4 decades to figure it out because I was in my early 40s. It was an absolute game changer. All of my relationships started to become so much more fulfilling. I became so much more impactful and influential with the people that were in my life. And to be honest, it just felt better. So now, when I used to meet someone, I was always thinking, all right, what can this person do for me? Who can they introduce me to? What can I get from them? And now it's the exact opposite. When I meet someone like yourself, my first thought is, how can I add value to them? Who can I introduce them to? What can I do to make their life better? And it's just a much better perspective to have, at least, from my own personal experience.
I love that. It's awesome. And there's like these practical things that still show up. And again, same, like in the full transparency of in progress, make so many mistakes, still trying to figure my way through all this stuff. And our team's a size of 11. It's not like we're 400 person organization, but it's 11 humans and their families and their fears and their responsibilities and their failures and their concerns and their hopes and their dreams, all that. Right. And so we interact with enough companies that we see some crazy stuff. I think it's crazy, where it's like executive VIP parking spots right by the front door, or, hey, my door is always open policies, but the leader actually never like goes outside of their door. They just stay inside their office and they don't pursue people. Or this even subtle language that I'm sure I've used, and I work really hard to stay aware of it. But when you hear a leader say my team versus like our team, it's just these little subtle things that are, I think, indicators to, like you just mentioned, of this. Am I doing this for me, or am I doing this for others? And that's, I think, a lovely lesson for folks to be mindful of. I have 2 last questions before we wrap, and I'm so grateful you've carved this much time. You mentioned earlier you used this phrase or this word. You said design. You said you've designed your life, and I love that word. Number one, because we're a creative agency, so we love design. My wife is a interior designer by like function, and she's got her master's in counseling by training. But we've talked a lot, she and I have talked a lot about life design, and I don't think it's a topic that is super common. And so when you mention that word, you've designed your life, you're almost 50, it's been a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and fundamentals along the way and learnings. What is part of a good life design? Like, how would you, I don't know, distill or teach a topic for someone who's like, wait, I've never even considered how I can design my own life? Because I think we have this kind of posture generally of life's going to happen to me and whatever happens, happens. But when you think life design, what comes to your mind?
Well, what immediately comes to mind is you can either live a life by design or you can live a life by default. And just take the automatic settings that we're all programmed to have, or just do what everyone else tells you to do. And obviously, the way I'm even saying that, it's clear that I would prefer to live a life that I design. But even with that, one of the traps of living a life by design is playing the comparison game. Because each and every one of us, let's be honest, we have certain parameters in our life that make things different. I'll just use myself as an example. So I'm almost 50 years old. I've been divorced for 10 years. I have 3 children. I'm self-employed and run a keynote speaking business. Like, those are kind of the pillars that shape my life. So within those, I need to figure out what's the type of life I want to live, and how can I design a life that allows me to pour into my business, that allows me to be present with my children when they are with me and I have my children, keeping in mind that at 50, I'm not 20 anymore. So I can't design the life, that I wanted to live when I was 20, nor do I even want to. So there's these different parameters. And one of the things that I believe makes up the foundation of a winner's mindset is do the best you can with what you have wherever you are. So the reason I say that is, someone listening to this, you might be 35 and married with no children and you work a W-2 job. Awesome. You can still design a life that you love, but yours might be different than mine. One, we probably have different interests in what we consider to be an amazing life, but we also have different parameters and different responsibilities. And that part's okay. And there's lots of things in life that we have to endure, for a season or even a reason. And children play a big role in that. The difference between having no children, having infants and toddlers, or having an empty nest because your kids are in college. Well, those are three very distinctly different parameters that will play a role in the life you design. But ultimately, it just comes down to you getting crystal clear on your core values and getting crystal clear on the person that you want to become and getting crystal clear on the things that fill your bucket and light you up, the things that make you feel alive. And then you almost draw kind of a Venn diagram with all of those and figure out, how can I live a life that is in alignment with what I believe? How can I live a life that is taking me closer to being the man I strive to become? And how can I live a life spending a lot of my time doing the things I love to do and that fill my bucket? And then how can I do those things underneath the parameters of having a responsibility of being a business owner, of being a father, and those types of things. And then you just start to kind of put this collage together and then you make those decisions. One of the most important pillars in my life personally is my self-care, is pouring into my physical, mental, and emotional well-being. So I do spend a fairly decent amount of my time working on my physical fitness, being very precise and, as some people would say, finicky about what I eat, about prioritizing my sleep. Now, those things are really important to me and who I'm trying to become. They don't have to be important to you or to anyone listening. You might place a lower value on that. That's fine. I know what things I love and I know what things I don't. And it's taken me almost 50 years to get that type of clarity. And now that's how I'm working towards designing my life. And also keep in mind that this is evergreen and it's esoteric. It's not a destination. Like, I'm always making tweaks.
Journey. Yes.
It's a journey, as cliche as that may sound. It's not about just saying, well, this is the perfect life and now I'm here. No, things will change because in 10 years from now, I'll no longer be 50. I'll no longer have kids that are in high school because they'll be empty nesters. I may not still live in the DC area 10 years from now. So those things are going to constantly change. So we have to be able to be reflexive and adaptive enough to change with it. All I know is that for every successive year after this, that I'll still be on this planet. My goal is to live a life by design. And that is one of my, most significant and meaningful priorities.
That's an awesome answer, man. I love that. Yeah, what came to mind instantly was the distinction, and back to that Starting Five documentary on Netflix. You got LeBron, 38, doing the thing, super detailed, super rigid, super precise, has clearly evolved as he's gotten older. And then Anthony Edwards, who's like, 23. And he's like, I want to take care of my body. And then the next scene is him like crushing dominoes. And it's like, bro, you can't when you're 20, when you're 23, it works. It's just really funny. But I think I've become, over these last several years, like literally my mornings are get up with a cup of black coffee and go on a walk. And it's like, I'm turning into a mall walker, bro. And I love it. It's just awesome. It's so different how the seasons change, and I think that's great. All right, less serious question, and then one more serious one. Less serious question. If you had to pick only one pair of your Jordan collection to take with you on a road trip, what is it? Which one?
One singular pair?
Yeah, you only get one pair.
Okay. Well, let me start to whittle it down with saying of all the Jordans, I'm kind of a Jordan 1. Like, that's my favorite, followed closely by the 3s, the 4s, the 5s, and the 11s. Yeah, they're all great. Well, I recently, and these are the ones that I actually wore in Kansas City. They're called the Jordan 1 Homage, and they're split in half. And on the outside of the shoe, it's just the black and red. And on the inside, it's the black, red, and white, which, as any Jordan aficionado knows, when the Jordans first came out in 1986, those were the only two colorways that were offered at the time. Yep. And this shoe has both of them. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say they'd be my favorite at present.
I love it. Serious question, and then we'll wrap. The interesting thing for me on the outside looking in and having just tiny bits of perspective into your story is you've become Miss Laszlo. Like in such an amazing, like ironic twist of story, it's like you are a teacher, like you are a fundamentalist, you are I don't know if I can be dramatic here, like you're an evangelist for these like micro practices that build into something and compound into something great. And I don't know if you're still in a relationship with her, but it's like, dude, she'd be damn proud. Like her leaf assignment has blossomed and grown into something in you, and the impact you're making in others into something really beautiful. And it's like, yo, you're a teacher, man. How cool is that?
Well, I appreciate that. One, that assignment was so early in my student teaching. I'm pretty confident Ms. Laszlo has no idea who I even am, because I wasn't there long enough. I wasn't even there long enough for a cup of coffee. So she has no idea who I am. But there's an important lesson to learn from that, and it's one that I'm incredibly grateful for. Is when we do teach and we preach on page and on stage, we never know who's listening or watching, and we never know the impact that we're making.
Yes.
I mean, if your mother-in-law hadn't texted you and you reached out to me, I would never know that she found my talk valuable and that it was helpful, and I understand it in what I do. Now, I'm incredibly grateful. I have so many people that are so kind and thoughtful and supportive that they'll come up to me after a speaking engagement, or they'll shoot me a DM on Instagram, and they'll offer praise, which absolutely warms my heart. But that's still only a small fraction of the people that attend any of my speaking engagements. So everybody else, I have no idea if what I said resonated. But it's super cool to know that what we put out into the world could be having a positive impact on someone else. And Miss Laszlo, I have no idea where she is or what she's doing. I know she has no idea who I even am, but she absolutely had an impact on my life. And now I'm hopefully having an impact on others. So there's also this ripple effect. And to me, that's super cool. So it's not lost on me that whether it's a social media post, it's a podcast interview, it's a keynote, or it's a book, when I put stuff out in the world, it's going to have an impact on someone that I'll never even know. And that's kind of a cool thing.
That's so cool. I love that. Alan, thanks. As you know, we wrap each show with two specific questions to us. First one is, what does human first mean to you? What does that phrase mean?
It means it's not about me. It's about you. It's not about me. It's about you. I try to enter every relationship with that mindset. That kind of dovetails nicely to what we talked about earlier about transformational leadership. But it's going through the world acknowledging that we're all humans, and that even though we live in a rather divisive culture, we have way more things in common and way more things in similarity as human beings than we do differences. And I want to lean into those and just remember that in every situation, it's not about me. I try to make it about you.
So good. I love that answer. That's so great. And then the last one, what does give a damn mean to you? You already said you're a certified give a dammer. I love that.
Yeah. If you were to ask me kind of the traditional question of, Alan, what do you think your superpower is? At the risk of sounding like I lack humility, I have a few. One of them is my discipline. One of them is my ability to be consistent. But I would say my number one superpower is I care. I care about people. I care about the organizations I work with. I care about the environment. I care about people's well-being. I care about my well-being. So when I think about caring a lot and having a big heart, that's just another way of saying I absolutely give a damn. I care about the job I do. I care about how I show up in this world. I care that I've hopefully added value to your life and everyone that's watching and listening. Like, those things are important to me. So giving a damn to me is just synonymous with caring.
So good. It's an awesome answer. Wonderful answer. Alan, if I know people can literally just Google your name, but where would you point, like what's the on-ramp to your journey for folks to follow along?
Well, the hub of everything is just AlanSteinJr.com. I'm also at Alan Stein Jr. on Instagram, X, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Very easy to find. And I take pride in being very accessible and responsive. So if anyone has a question to ask or wants to share something or just wants to connect, shoot me a DM on LinkedIn or on Instagram. I'm good about getting back with folks. And then I do have 2 books, Raise Your Game and Sustain Your Game, both of which are easily found on Amazon or Audible or wherever you get your books and audiobooks.
That's amazing. We didn't even get to talk about your book writing journey. We didn't talk about a lot of stuff, but
I can come back on in the future. We can have a part 2. I would love that.
I love it. And I'm evidence. I mean, not to be too silly, but like I'm the random ass dude in Kansas City who has a marketing agency and a podcast that's not as big as Rich Roll, right? And like I DM'd you, I sent you a random audio message and you responded. And you're like, yeah, I'd love to be on your show. And so I think even for me, the meaningful contributions you're making are impactful, man. And I'm grateful. I know our team is grateful. They're pumped to hear this conversation, and I know our community will too. So thanks, Alan. We really appreciate you joining us, my friend.
Likewise. Thank you.